Welcome everybody. It's great to have you here from the Sparx Systems YouTube channel. My name's Scott Hebbard, and as usual we're continuing to look at our urban parking system repository that's been developed and designed in Enterprise Architect. I know when talking to customers and clients, occasionally they will have specific terms to their businesses or their organizations, and sometimes they like to store those in a glossary. But I'm not really sure how glossaries work in Enterprise Architect, so hopefully you can help me today, Stephen, to introduce how glossaries work in Enterprise Architect and how they might be used by people that are using Enterprise Architect.
Scott, thank you for the introduction, and as always, I'm delighted to be here. And today we are going to talk about glossaries. The terms, the definitions, the elements, the things that we define in our model are really important corporate assets. Information is, a little bit like the blood that flows through an organization. It's a very vital part of how an organization works and operates and is successful in these really competitive times. So let's get started. I'm not going to set a perspective at the moment. I've got structural selected there. We normally go up and set our perspective, and for newcomers to the tool, that's a way of setting focus on what you're going to do. So we've got all sorts of different things here. We've got, requirements and UX design and business modeling and things. So let's actually select a business modeling perspective, and we'll do that. The tool changes, not completely critical, but we are going to be focusing on some business terms today. So where do we find the glossary? Well, in the design ribbon, on the design ribbon, we've got a number of different panels. Right at the end, there's one panel that's labeled dictionary, and we've got two items in there, glossary and spelling, obviously related to each other. I want to make sure that the terms you're putting into your glossary is spelled well. Let's just open that up and see what we've got. And it's got glossary view. So let's click on that. Now, clearly, we've got some things already defined in our glossary. We've got a parking session, business process management, business process model and notation. And if we look at that, the meaning is coming up in the column that's entitled meaning there. So the notes are not down here. We've got notes that's on the selected package. They're not relevant to what we're doing at the moment. So let's look at how we organize our glossary. So we've got a term, a type, a meaning, and then another column called model item, which we'll come back to. So let's just put another term in here. Let's see how easy that is to do. Remember this favorite action in Enterprise Architect, the right mouse click, add new, and that's popped up onto another monitor. I'm just going to drag that onto this monitor, and I've got a term here. I'm going to call it business rule. So that's the term business rule, and I'm going to put in a meaning there, and I'll say statement that defines or constrains some aspect of business operations. I'll put a full stop on that. And notice I can set the type there. I'm just going to leave that as business at the moment and apply that. And you can see that that's gone into the glossary list. And I could hit new there to put in a new term and continue on with this. So if I wanted to do that, let me just put in choreography as a term again. So I'll hit new here, and a term I'm going to put in choreography. So this is to do with business process diagrams that are defining the choreography, and these are defined in business process model and notation, the de facto kind of language for describing all things to do with processes and the way that businesses interact. Now I can type in a different meaning here. So let's just say I can't choose from that one there, but I want to set my own. And so that will just pop up on another monitor. Let me just see if I can find that in a minute. It's just got a number of different monitors operation. Let's put this one here and call it BPMN. So business process model and notation. We're saying that this word choreography is part of that. Let's put a meaning in there. So the type
So you
of
could
process,
have different types. You could have business terms, scientific terms, language terms. There might be
exactly.
some business jargon, all that sort
Exactly.
of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Scott. So let's just apply this one, and you can see now, we'll say okay to that. You can see now it's gone into its own group there. Now, I can change that if I want to. The parking session, I said, is a business thing, the core concept that manages an individual parking event, but actually it's part of what I prefer to call domain. So I'm going to say, modify selected there, and
Yep.
I'm going to say, look, I want to set this thing again, and this time I want to make it into domain. So it's part of my domain. I'll say okay to that and apply that. And you can see now another group has popped up. So how do you use these terms in here? What are they useful for? Well, clearly, as you explained in your introduction, Scott, it's very useful to get everyone singing from the same sheet, right? Singing from the same music book, and everyone knows what these things mean. But they're not an isolated list of things. They actually do some work for you in Enterprise Architect. And so we're going to have a quick look at how that works. But remember, you could create any number of your own items. And as you pointed out, you could put them into different categories. Let's go into a model now and have a look at our structural model, say, our class model here. And we've got this item called a parking session there. So let's think about that. And let's see if we've got a motorist there. And, let's have a look at let's look at a vehicle. A vehicle being parked, this is a typical car, but could extend to this. So let's put in the motorist will create a parking session and or a parking event, let's say. So what you can see now, Scott, is that
It's underlined.
Yeah, it's underlined. And what's more, when you roll over it, you can see that a box pops up and it says domain : that domain is the type if you look at the screen, you can see the type it's a type of domain, and it says the core concept that manages an individual parking event acting as the crucial link between a motorist and the parking meter. It functions as digital recording. Control click gives you that hint. Control click for full definition. So hold the control click there, and it comes up there and tells me exactly what a parking session's about. So that's seeing the glossary in action, and that means that these definitions are right there close to you, and you don't need to elaborate in a particular definition about the item that you're referring to in that definition. So the other thing is that when I create a template, if I was going to create a report, I can put these into a report as well, including the glossary into any report. So if I was to go to to publish thing there and look at a template editor things, I've got all sorts of different options here, but one of them is the glossary. And so right. I could put my terms in there, and then the glossary could go in the front of any piece of documentation. So you might be creating a business process documentation. You might be doing it for solution architecture or enterprise architecture, and the glossary can go in, and then you can define the terms for that document. So this is not about publishing, but I just wanted to show you how that is useful.
Use those in a report and help remove some ambiguity around term definitions.
Exactly, Scott. Let's have a look at something else, because Enterprise Architect is an incredibly flexible tool, and quite often when you've got lists of things, the designers of the tool realize that you can model things as well. And while this list is very important, it doesn't give you any relationship between these elements. And so let me give you an example, Scott, from a scientific organization that we did some recent work with. They were doing their glossary, or their definition of terms, which they were using on their website, and they were doing it in their favorite spreadsheet tool. And they had all sorts of very complicated formulas and things linking up elements because they were all connected to each other. and one term was related to 3 other terms. What they wanted to do was effectively publish it on their website and have a term, its definition, and then the related elements. And so they were able to do that using the facility that I'm going to show you now. So let's have a look at how that might work. So let's create another package under here called glossaries. And I'm just going to create a package using the package icon on the browser toolbar. And actually, before we do that, let's change our perspective into glossaries, because we are going to do some work with that. So publishing is the perspective set, and there we've got glossaries there. So there are a number of examples in here, Scott, as always. We've got examples, patterns, and these things can be injected into your models. And, there are all sorts of different patterns there that you can use. I like to do things from first principles. So let's close the builder page and let's start from scratch. So return here, we're going to create a package called glossaries. Glossary. Let's make it glossaries. And let's go OK to that. And now let's go over and look at our stereotype. So I could have injected the pattern, which would have saved me a lot of time, but I want to show you this thing from first principles. So I'm going to make that into a glossary. So I just simply check that box there, say OK, and that will turn it into a glossaries package. I now want to add a particular glossary underneath that one that I've got. So let's have a look at what I'm going to do with that. And I think I'm going to add a glossary category under here called strategy. So again, I'm going to look at this one here, create a new package, and I'm going to call it strategy. There's all sorts of strategic terms that are familiar to people in the business, but not so familiar to the technology people. And of course, the reverse is true as well. Let's go OK to that. And now let's make this one into a glossary category. So again, I simply click on the little 3 dots there. It comes up with a list of possible things we can have for our glossary. Let's choose glossary category. And now we've got a glossary category. So the next thing I want to do is I want to put some things onto a diagram. So I'm going to create a diagram here. And I now have a list of diagram types in the glossary diagram, the glossary item list there. And the one I want to choose is glossary item lists. So I'm going to create that diagram. I'm going to keep it called as strategy. Say OK to that. Now I've got a blank canvas. And so what I'm effectively doing is what I did before with the glossary list that we saw. We just listed and we went, new item. Effectively, what I'm now doing is modeling the glossary. So let's have a look at some terms we might want to put in here. And let's have a look and say, compliance incentivization. So let's put a term in called that. That's a business term. So what I'm going to do is in my model, I'm going to create that as a term. So what I want to do is go to my glossary here, and my glossary there, that's got the category on it. And if I go to the other one here, that's got the entry. What I'm going to do is drag a glossary entry onto the diagram, and I'm going to give it that name. And as always, Scott, I like to put notes in. We need to tell what the meaning of this thing is. So this is the notes now is effectively acting as the meaning. So we'll put that in there, and we'll save that. We'll save the diagram, and let's go back and have a look at our glossary. So when we refresh this, let's reload our glossary actually there and reload the glossary. You can see now that parking incentivization has come in. Now that must have been somewhere else in the model. So let's have a look and see whether I can find that. And I can say find in browser, and that's that one there. And let's have a look at this one here and say find in browser, and it's in another location. So let's move on with that now. What I'm going to get you to do is to do some time travel magic, Scott, and I'll just finish this diagram off. But this principle is very simple. We just create a glossary package, a glossary category, and then we put on glossary entries underneath that. So I'll get you to perform some time magic, and I'll finish this diagram off.
So welcome back, everybody. I've performed a little bit of time traveling and editing magic, and now we've developed a number of different elements here on this strategy diagram, and hopefully they all appear in the glossary. So let's have a look.
Have a look at that. We're flicking over to the glossary view, and you can see now that all of those elements there are listed in the glossary, and you can see that the model item is true. And again, the same thing applies here, Scott. We can use this data-driven policy making revenue optimization in our text somewhere, and that will pop up. So let's have a look at that and say, revenue optimization. Choose that there, and let's go up to our strategy model and change some of the text in one of the models there. So we'll say, this strategic map perhaps, and let's put something in here. Allows for revenue optimization, and you can see now that term is there. And if I roll over it, we've got strategic pricing and utilization techniques to maximize financial returns. So really useful. I can click there, and I'll get up the dialog box. So that is an example of how we model those elements. And of course, let's go back here a bit and say what we can do now is, if we wanted to, we can put relationships in between these elements. So I could use an association relationship between these two and say, look, compliance, incentivization, and data-driven policy are connected to each other in some way. So that would be a useful thing to do. The other thing I'm going to show you is another way of creating a glossary. So this time, what I want to do is use the existing elements that are in my model and show how they can be included into my model. So let's have a look at some of the things that we might want to put in here into our glossary, another part of the model. So let's have a think about what things we might have. So in our structural models, or our information models, let's have a look at that. We've got a conceptual data model there, and we've got a number of things here that are talking about all sorts of things. Location, motorists, we've got a logical model there that's talking about different things. So what I can do now is I can go up into my glossary world up here, and I can create a glossary up here that is going to be a new package there, and I'm going to call it data modeling. And so I'll create that new package. And what I need to do now is to put a specific type of diagram in. So I'm going to call that glossary there, and I'm going to put in a glossary list, item list diagram. So when I create that diagram, we've got this data modeling glossary there, put that on. And now, Scott, I can just grab things from my other parts of my model. So let's look at this one, and we'll put in some things from the conceptual model. So let's drag location into there and say OK. And of course, we can drag motorist in there as well. Anything we want, and say we want parking zone. But let's leave and we'll put in vehicle, but we'll leave transaction and payment and things out of there. And so we've got those elements. You can see that there are relationships between them, and we've got those notes going in as well. Let's just change some of this, use some of our features in the tool to make this diagram a bit kind of more organized there. And let's say that we want all these elements to be the same size, lay out their tops, and let's use some diagram layout features and say that we want that to go into a box shape there. And let's put in again maybe the have auto route the connectors. And so we've got our relationship in there. So now let's have a look at what's gone on. All we've simply done is we haven't defined these as new elements. With location and motorists already existed in there as conceptual data model elements. And all we've done is put them onto this diagram. Let's go back and have a look at our glossary now. And, let's refresh this glossary. Reload the glossary. And now you can see a new category's popped up. And it's got those elements in it: vehicle, parking zone, motorist, and location. And it's got the type, data modeling, which was the name of our diagram, and it's got the definitions in there. So effectively, what we're doing is we're saying, look, we already have information in the repository in the form of a conceptual data model, and it could be any model. It could be a business process model, and I'm just simply have created that diagram, and it's a special type of diagram. If you look over in the properties, it's a glossary item list diagram. Drag those existing elements on, and voila, they are in the glossary. And
so if you've spent hours and hours developing all of these terms for modeling purposes, you can reuse them in the glossary.
Exactly right, Scott. And you don't need to redefine them. You don't have this, this overlap or this sort of redundancy between things you've created in the glossary and things that are in your model. So take-home message from a modeling point of view, I like to keep the things that are in the glossary by the ones that aren't model items, the ones that you create by going add new, which are sort of pure glossary items and aren't in the model at all. I like to keep those as things that are kind of outside my modeling world. So if you notice that when I put things in up here, we had a BPMN before, we had a choreography, we had a type business process management. That's not going to be one of my terms. The term parking zone or motorist is definitely going to be in my model somewhere. And, by my rule of putting notes into all the elements when you create them, there would be term definitions. So that's pretty much a deep dive into the glossaries. There's one other thing I want to show you, Scott, which is the ability to, when you publish this, to create different styles for the glossary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some CSS. I need some CSS code that I'm going to put in here, and I'm going to show you what I can do. I can right mouse click on my glossary page here, and it says assign markup styles. That pops up a window there, and you can see, I'll just delete these ones out of here for the moment, and we'll start from fresh. So here I've got my strategy, and I can say, look, I want a particular style for that. So let's have a look at that, and it says, enter the value here. Let's call it and make it's our style, clear and concise. So it's a particular style in the markup that we want. I enter that. That puts that code in there, and all I simply need to do now is to put in some CSS, and you can see now that I've got the paragraph
I noticed
style.
to put some dashes in the name up the top because clearly CSS
exactly, Scott. I don't need
handle spaces.
Yeah, I don't need to think about that. That's a much better thing to have there. So behind the scene, Enterprise Architect as always is doing work for you, and you can see now that in the language term we've got the font weight is bold. We've got the font type. We've got a particular color defined there, and text transform is capitalized. So the sky's the limit there in terms of defining those, and of course I can set my own particular style for each one of these different term categories. So that's just a useful thing to do when you're publishing these things out. But I encourage anyone that hasn't been using the glossary or hasn't been using the diagram list type of glossary to do some work yourself, and you'll find that you'll get great productivity from using those tool features.
Thanks, Stephen. That's been really interesting. It's been especially good to see how you can take existing modelling information, and I could see many businesses would find this valuable to help define business terms, scientific terms, jargon that they use, definitions for for business rules and all sorts of things. So really, really powerful stuff. As always, we'd like to thank you all for joining us today. It's great to have so many positive comments on our videos. As always, if you've enjoyed what you've seen today, we encourage you to like, comment and subscribe to Sparx Systems YouTube channel. We're very pleased that it's growing, and we love getting feedback from you. If you have any questions about creating a glossary, feel free to reach out to Stephen using his website or LinkedIn credentials that are listed in the description below. And as always, thank you, Stephen. It's been great talking to you today, great learning about the glossary, and it's great to see how easy it is to develop a glossary within Enterprise Architect.
Always a pleasure, Scott.